Hey guys, it's Vocal Pineapple, and I asked my Twitter followers to ask me questions for this Q&A video, and at the end of it, I'm going to ask you guys to do the same so we can do another one for the comments. So let's get right into it after that intro. Hit it! The first question is going to come from Nezu Props. What are the things approaching Deku? Star and Stripes pilots, villains incoming, all for one? I think the things that are approaching Deku are probably going to be some of the last Nomu. We have 8 things approaching Deku right now, right? So I think that could potentially be Nomu that are pretty much made to embody the previous users of One For All, because I do think that is something that All For One could think of. I mean, I thought of it, right? If he did have access to the previous bodies of the One For All users, then those would absolutely become Nomu, right? I mean, just even, not even because they would be super powerful or anything, because we know that their quirks themselves weren't exactly all that powerful. More so just because I feel like All For One is super petty, right? And I think putting you in a situation as a One For All user to then face all the previous users and stuff like that would be really, really awesome. Now, I know that All Might is one of those users, so clearly his body wouldn't be included in that, right? Since he's alive. And the first user's body probably also wouldn't be included in that. But I do know that the original USJ Nomu, I believe, was in Tartarus, right? So that Nomu's probably released and probably has had some modifications or some quirks added to it. And really, that's kind of what I think is going on, right? I don't think it's a Star and Stripes pilots. We saw them flying around UA, kind of keeping the barrier intact. You know, if anyone breaks out of the barrier, that's kind of their job. So I don't know if they would all head towards Deku. And I also don't know if there are 8 of them, right? Like, do we know how many of Star and Stripes pilots, how many of those blackbirds are still hovering in the air, or how many there ever were? Were there ever 8? I don't think so. So I'm wondering if it's going to be some sort of Nomu. And I remember the text at the end of that chapter, or the editor text, suggested that it was some kind of threat that Deku has to deal with, right? So hopefully it is. I want to delay Deku arriving to the Shigaraki area as much as possible, because that's literally the final battle of My Hero Academia, right? So we want the series to go on just a little bit longer if we can. But yeah, Nezu Props, thanks for the question, and that is my answer. Next question is from Diz or Jan Very on Twitter. Are there any joint moves that you can think of that you would love to see the students and heroes do? A couple things come to mind right offhand. I really think that someone blocking out the sky for Tokoyami to go absolutely nuts, or making some sort of cave or some sort of dark area for him would be really awesome. I think Ochako using her quirk on Deku in general, right, is a massive boost for Deku, him pretty much becoming weightless. With as fast and everything as he is, that would be pretty nuts. I think my favorite idea for a combo move would be Mina putting the Acid Man over Kirishima, and then Ochako floating Kirishima so he gets very high in the sky, or maybe having even Deku or someone fly up and carry him, and then dropping him on Makia, right? And having him do like a crazy from the sky terminal velocity punch against Makia to try and break through that hide that Makia has, right? Using the combined power of like a very acidic Acid Man, like a dangerously acidic Acid Man, and having Kirishima ask Mina to put that on him, right? Like, I can take it. Put your strongest Acid Man on me, the strongest acid you can possibly make, and I'm gonna go unbreakable, and it's not gonna reach my skin. Or maybe it'll reach my skin in a couple places, but we have to do this to take down Makia and maybe pierce his heart, or somehow pierce his hide, or maybe just punch through his throat, right? So I definitely think that's an actual possibility to a certain extent, maybe not with Ochako and Deku and everything, but I do think Kirishima and Mina are gonna do some sort of combination attack like that. This one's from Madmen, Young Midoriya on Twitter. Do you think MHA is going to have a part 2 or a Shippuden after this arc is over? Or do you think this is it and the universe ends here? I do sadly think that the universe ends here, but before I used to be one of the biggest proponents of there being a part 2 of My Hero Academia, right? My Hero Academia is the kind of series that just has so much potential to go on into the future and seeing these characters as adults, right? But it's really, really difficult to remove Shigaraki from the plot line, or All For One from the plot line, and not have them be the main villain, just because thematically how well that fits with Deku as a character, and how well it kind of like approaches the question of what is a hero, what is a villain, who needs to be saved, what is that process like, right? So I do think this is going to be the end of My Hero Academia, but I do think that's also a shame, right? It doesn't have to be. I could see a world where it goes on, right? And I feel like a lot of us see that. A lot of us see a world where we're seeing them as 19-year-olds and 25-year-olds and stuff like that, and seeing what their life is like after school. Because, you know, a lot of this series is about getting invested in these heroes that are gonna one day be greats, and you think that you're going to see them be greats, right? And you're just kind of seeing the PTS version of them, right? You're seeing like the part 1 Naruto kind of teenage hero version of greatness, but I think most of us definitely want to see Deku as an adult, right? And Bakugo and all these characters, well, not Bakugo anymore, right? But all these characters as adults and seeing what they're capable of when put in actually the exact same situations as Endeavor and Hawks and all these others, with having that day-to-day responsibility, right? And not just being child soldiers, essentially. Andy Yang on Twitter asks, how would you react if Bakugo somehow survives? Honestly, not very well. I'm gonna be honest. A lot of people think that I want Bakugo to die, like I actively wanted him to die. And not only did I never theorize that Bakugo was gonna die, I think the worst that I did was theorize that Shigaraki would take his quirk, right? I mean, considering that Shigaraki can take your quirk and decay you at the same time, that's pretty nuts. But I did think that's what was going to happen, and then Bakugo would have to deal with that, right, before somehow getting his quirk back, or just not having his quirk, and kind of being more like Deku by the end of the series than he's ever been before. Clearly, that seems to not be the case anymore, but yeah, I just don't think that there's any good way to bring Bakugo back to life when Horikoshi has gone out of his way to remove all the obvious ways, right? Eri's not around and doesn't have any energy. The kissing old granny from UA, who's like the nurse, her lips are like super droopy and they left her behind also, and all those characters are miles away, right? We don't have anyone with a healing quirk at UA currently besides Shigaraki, so essentially, Shigaraki would have to give Bakugo regeneration for some reason within the next couple minutes for Bakugo to survive, and I just think that is extremely unlikely. But if I was gonna theorize, if I was gonna like put my theorizing glasses on, I would say maybe the only way for Bakugo to survive and for it to make any sort of sense, it's not one for all crap where people think the second user is gonna save him or All Might or something. I think the only way would be if Deku gets here immediately handles the fight with Shigaraki, and then somehow forces Shigaraki, or maybe just Tenko himself will do it because he wants to be a hero, has Tenko save Bakugo by giving him regeneration, right? Just momentarily giving him the regeneration quirk to at least save his life. That's the only way that I could see this going. Or maybe Deku just getting all for one and all those quirks himself, right? And then doing that himself by giving Bakugo regeneration. But I see that as extremely unlikely. It's kind of like one of the only ways out of this hole that Horikoshi has written himself into. But, you know, who knows? Tolerant MP3 on Twitter asks, personally, would you want Bakugo to actually be dead and not show up anymore in the series, or do you think he should stay alive to the very end or something else? I personally wouldn't want Bakugo to be dead if you asked me before this happened, but because I'm a very big proponent of like sticking with things that you do, you know, not going back because of fan demand or because of any other reason like popularity and stuff, let the narrative be the narrative, right? The narrative doesn't care who's the most popular character. It doesn't care who wins popularity polls. The narrative demands certain things, right? So if you're going to do a bunch of fake out deaths for the same character, we kind of had a very loose version of a fake out death for Bakugo in the previous war arc. Then literally a chapter or two before this death, what it seems to be a death, we have Bakugo seeing how he could die against Shigaraki, with Shigaraki smothering him and crushing him with the hands and destroying all his limbs, right? And that was a fake out for a page turn, right? We get those pretty often when someone is fighting against All for One or All for One Shigaraki. We even had it in the last arc, right? Where they see a vision of their own death pretty much and a way that they can go. So I definitely think that's been used very effectively, but now with all of the narrative weight and all the implications of this death specifically, and Horikoshi going out of his way to remove any and all healers, I just really feel like any way of going back on this death would be kind of turning this into a massive fake out. And I know a lot of people have actually gained respect for Horikoshi for doing what he did in this chapter, not because like they love the fact that Bakugo is gone, but just like this is something that normally an author wouldn't do. You know what I mean? Like normally an author is not going to off the number one rival in the series, arguably one of the main characters, one of the main protagonists in the series, right? So I definitely feel like he's gained a lot of people's respect from that, and I don't think he should go back on killing Bakugo. But do I think that Bakugo shouldn't be in the series at all? No, I definitely think Bakugo is going to be a vestige or something, and he is going to contribute to the final kind of quirk tug-of-war battle between Deku and All for One, or I guess All for One Shigaraki. Oreo166 asks me, what do you think of Ochako's quirk in terms of how utilized it is or could be? I'm asking since many always say it's underutilized. I think Ochako should carry around a big hammer or sword or something, right? Like Ochako's quirk has the kind of ability to just have things that are heavier than you normally would have to carry around or want to carry around, right? We know that parts of her suit are actually a little heavier than normal, like her wrist gauntlets, because they're loaded with like wire and thread. So she does kind of make use of that a little bit, but I definitely think that Ochako having some sort of like, just some sort of hammer, or not sword, because we know that Ochako is not going to go crazy like that, but just some sort of giant weapon, right? I feel like would be really, really cool for her to carry around or just have with her or have attached to her, because it would be weightless, right? She could just constantly keep it weightless, just like how she keeps her costume more or less constantly weightless. And that's just another way to train your quirk. And even if it's weightless, you can turn your quirk off when you're bringing the hammer down, right? And make it all sorts of heavy again. So I think that'd be really useful for Ochako. And then, you know, people would try to disarm her and get rid of the weapon. And then she would just use her amazing gunhead fighting style, right? That we've seen she became so good at over the course of the series. So I definitely think that's one way that Ochako's quirk is underutilized. But let me know if you think there are any better ways that she could use her quirk instead of what I thought of already. Johnny Midoriya on Twitter asks me, do you think Uraraka will get some sort of quirk awakening while fighting Toga? That is really hard to kind of guess, right? I think a lot of characters are going to be getting quirk awakenings in general as we kind of finish the series out. It does make me wonder how Ochako is going to overcome Sad Man's Parade by Toga, right? Like, one, she's going to have to find the real Toga in there somewhere, which is going to be quite difficult, honestly. Two, you have to deal with the fact that Toga can make twices, probably, right? So that's going to be a whole thing in and of itself, to have to fight all the people that Twice can make and just all those random massive clones. So I think Ochako, one of her things that she's going to do, just like in Heroes Rising, where she touches all the rocks that like they try to use against Nine for that period of time, I think she's going to rapidly go around hitting as many Twice clones as she can and just making them float, right, as high as she possibly can, and she'll bring them down very much in a similar way to how Toga fought Curious and all her minions, right, and then splashed them down onto the ground, destroying them and breaking their necks and making blood splatter. I think Ochako will actually do a very, very similar thing to a lot of the Twice clones or Toga clones, but I do think a very, very important part of this arc with Toga and Ochako is that Toga doesn't feel seen by Ochako, right? She doesn't feel like Ochako understands or sees her struggle. And I think in this arc, through having so many clones, so many different Togas, and still having Ochako find the actual Toga through all of that, we're actually going to see Toga feel seen by Ochako and realize that Ochako's actually come around to the correct answer to her question. So I think that's going to be really interesting, and I'm looking forward to the Ochako Toga plotline. I'm sorry that everyone seems to hate that plotline, but I'm at least pretty invested in it. Filthy Dog Main on Twitter asks, do you ever think we'll get to see main series Koichi? Probably Copium, but I sure hope we do. I want that to be likely more than I think it's actually likely, right? Because we know America and all the other countries kind of isolated Japan, right, after Star and Stripes, because you got to consider Star and Stripes' quirk was so broken, it started making people think that the rules in My Hero Academia were starting to not make any sense. Like, power creep was really getting to that point where we're just kind of going beyond anything that should work or should be happening in My Hero, right? Because the two rules that kind of completely change reality, that's nuts. I think that kind of mirroring real life to a certain extent, I mean, you can argue this whether or not you believe it's true, but I mean, I kind of believe it's true. Mirroring real life, America and My Hero Academia is probably the world's biggest superpower, right? I know that you could argue in real life that it's Russia or China or any of these other countries, but to be honest, I do think that it's America who poses one of the biggest threats and the biggest dangers militarily, right? And that's at least the perspective that people have on America, or that's at least the message that we try to give across, right? So I definitely see how America right now in My Hero Academia could realistically have the strongest hero period that there's ever been outside of All Might, right? And seeing her lose and pretty much get destroyed on top of all the nukes and everything that was shot toward Shigaraki to try to take him out, I definitely think that every other country saw that and they were like, nope, we have nothing else. We have nothing that can compare to Star and Stripes. America's number 2 hero is a boy that can slide. You know what I mean? Like, and slide and fly. Like, he's, you know, I know he has pretty much Ultra Instinct Koichi, right? Very situationally, but he's pretty much Super Slide and Go, mix of Captain Universe or whatever the captain's name, National Captain from Vigilante. Someone please remind me what that guy's name was. But do I think we'll see Koichi? I think it'd be very nice to. I definitely want Koichi to meet All Might once more, or I don't even remember if he actually met All Might in Vigilantes. I just know All Might was in the vicinity, right? So I want to see Koichi meet All Might. I want to see Koichi meet Deku, and for Deku to see, you know, the All Might sweater that he doesn't have probably, that only Koichi has. I want to see that kind of stuff. So hopefully we do see Koichi, but we're really getting close to the end and it's getting down to the wire. We might not. Shadow Nomad 35 asks me, have you ever heard of the ghastly theory? And if so, do you think Iida is in danger of dying? I actually don't think I have. No, I think I've heard of it. There's like a ghastly theory. That's what it is, not ghastly. I saw like one tweet about it and I scrolled past it. Not because I wasn't interested or anything, but there was just like a lot going on that day on Twitter. So please let me know in the comment section below what that theory really entails and why it would put Iida in danger of dying. I'm really interested to find out. What do you think of Iida as a character? I don't think you've ever really talked about him, to be honest, from Mushi on Twitter. I think Iida's okay. I mean, there's probably a reason that I haven't really talked about Iida that much. I don't find Iida to be the most interesting or compelling character in My Hero Academia to talk about. I don't really feel like there's a lot going on of his plot line, to be honest. He's kind of like the bigger brother of the whole class, and that's sweet and that's cool and everything. But I don't know, definitely never been one of my favorite characters in My Hero Academia, and I feel like he's kind of completely outshined by the characters in My Hero Academia Vigilantes, right? Who are like actual proper speedsters. It kind of takes away a lot from his character for me that he's not really all that fast considering. At Dream for All on Twitter says, what's the biggest what if scenario you want to see explored in a one shot? I definitely think that I'm a little biased here, but the biggest what if scenario that I'd probably like to see if it was explored in a one shot would probably be what if Aizawa found Tenko instead of All for One, right? I have a one part kind of, I want it to be multiple parts, but it's kind of an undertaking, right? Especially since I lost all my editing assets before, but I have a one part, at least for now, video series titled What If Tenko, right? Which is literally about that exact topic. And that only came out of my extreme kind of need to know what would happen in that situation, right? To kind of think through the actual events and not kind of just make stuff up and be like, oh, it'd be nice if this happened. Like actually doing sort of narrative math to try to figure out what would be most likely in that circumstance, right? And how that would change the entire story. So hopefully I will continue that series sometime soon, but I think that would be the biggest one shot that they could possibly do, other than like Lady Naga's backstory and all the stuff that we probably should get. As far as what ifs, what if Tenko was saved by Aizawa instead of All for One? Sean on Twitter wants to know predictions for if/when Gentle and La Brava will come back into the story. Feels like a drop thread with some potential. I definitely do think that Gentle and La Brava will have some sort of place in the story again, mainly because when Deku thought of all the people that he's fought against, right, and kind of gave us that, well, we're about to head into the final arc, so let's recap everything that we've done so far so we can go into this last arc, remembering everyone we've gone against. He did think of Gentle and La Brava, right? He thought of every villain that we saw return at some point in the series. Muscular was there, Overhaul was there. You know, everyone has been there but Gentle and La Brava. They haven't come back. And when we saw Gentle last, it was kind of set up for him to return in a more heroic sense, right? Like, thankfully, we stopped you before you really went too far or really became a villain for real. You know what I mean? Like, so I do think Gentle's going to return. If so, I do think a lot of people are theorizing that if Yue falls, it'd be really cool if Gentle could just bounce Yue back up. That would be really awesome. But that's going to be a lot of G-force, right? If that happens, I don't think everyone's going to survive anyway. It's going to be like when he tried to save the dude falling out of the building. But I do think Gentle has some sort of place here, right? I think Gentle would actually be really, really annoying for Shigaraki to go against right now, to be honest. But there are other battlefields that I could see him joining, like maybe the Dabi battlefield. But I really think having a previous villain fighting against Shigaraki, right? And Shigaraki tends to be the one that has conflicts with villains. And he never, ever, ever met or had any sort of conflict with Gentle, even though pretty much every villain in the series has some sort of relation to Shigaraki or conflict with Shigaraki. Because as Deku learns from them, you know, Horikoshi likes for Shigaraki to learn from them too, right? So I definitely do think Gentle's appearance is likely, but getting less likely with every chapter, honestly. And for La Brava, I think she's gonna have to have some sort of hacking battle with Skeptic, right? I've been saying that for an extremely long time. Skeptic has only ever failed Re-Destro one time in the past. We don't know about what happened there, but I know La Brava was actually a pretty prolific hacker, right? So if the Metal Liberation Army had their own hacker doing all sorts of stuff, maybe La Brava was being like a white hat, right? And taking care of some of the stuff that they did and kind of getting in their way without really knowing who she was going against. And I think it would be really, really awesome and thematic for her to do that again, right? In this final battle to kind of stop whatever Skeptic is planning, because we know that that guy has access to satellites and all sorts of propaganda technology. I think maybe La Brava showing the business course students video of everything going on, maybe, you know, with some cuts and edits, because we know that she did video edit for Gentle and stuff like that, right? Like, that would kind of be a match made in heaven, right? Having La Brava working with the business students to work on how they're going to release the footage of everything that happened to kind of gain hope from the populace again. I think that is the most likely scenario. Billy Dole on Twitter asks, where the hell is Stain? I think Stain is probably going to show up to the Dabi battlefield, right? Because we know that Dabi is a very big kind of proponent of Stain's way of doing things. He claims to be the biggest Stain fan and stuff like that, but I think he's taken what Stain was trying to do much too far, right? And I think the best thing to do with Stain's character, if you're not going to have anything happen with him and All Might, is to send him to the Dabi battlefield and have him actually take part in taking Dabi down, right? You know what I mean? Like keep my name out of your mouth. Stop saying that you're doing this because of me and all this stuff. Like, you are doing this because of who you are and how you are as a person and what's happened to you. Don't hijack my ideology to do whatever you want, right? And I also think it would fit a little better because who fought Stain? You know what I mean? It was Iida, Deku, and Todoroki, right? So right now in the Dabi area, we have Iida and Todoroki. So it would make Iida being there feel a little less random if you then include Stain and they work together to take Dabi down, right? And that would kind of bring their characters full circle. I know Iida probably really wouldn't want to work with Stain after everything that happened, but that's kind of the nature of where we are here now, where everyone kind of has to come together. Villain, hero, anyone, like whatever your label is, you have to come together right now to try to save Japan and save the world. @Kel on Twitter wants to know, do you think Shigaraki All For One is still going to be saved, and what or how will that even work? I do think that, well, let's be honest, I don't think Shigaraki or All For One are going to be saved. I think Tenko is going to be saved, right? I don't know quite how it's going to happen as far as like Deku getting there and raging. I think Deku's going to let off some steam for a while, you know, just tearing Shigaraki apart. But I do think once we get to the Quirk tug of war, which is when All For One tries to steal One For All and then One For All tries to keep itself from being stolen, I do think once we get to that point, what Star and Stripes did to All For One within Shigaraki, right, is sort of foreshadowing for what Deku is going to do, right? I think Deku and the previous holders of One For All, and maybe even Bakugo now, are going to rage against the quirks inside of All For One and Shigaraki himself to allow Deku to get to Tenko within that psyche and let him out so he has control over his main body again, right? Because it seems like that's All For One's biggest concern at the moment, that there's this aspect in his mind, or in Shigaraki's mind, that they haven't actually absorbed or taken control of. And since that's literally his original body, it's possible probably in some way for him to regain control of that, right? Very much in a similar way to like Yuji regaining control over Sukuna, or like momentarily Geto regaining control over his body, right? So it's that sort of thing, I think, and I think that's most likely to happen. Shigaraki Goat asks, why do you think All For One is reminded of the second user while fighting Bakugo? We both know it's not because of the same hairstyle. One, I think the second user of One For All is probably like Bakugo's ancestor or great-grandfather or something like that, so there's that distinction there. And two, I feel like we know that the second quirk user raided All For One's base, right, to get the first user. So we know that he did that without having One For All at all, right? So it's possible that he did come into conflict with All For One at that time, or maybe at least lead a massive group, because we know that the second did lead a large group against All For One. Maybe it's possible that they did already have some sort of conflict, right? And this is one of the only people ever throughout history to actually give All For One trouble without having All For One first, right? So that's what I think is likely. I don't think it's that it's Bakugo or that. I just don't see that, honestly. I just think that All For One within Shigaraki has kind of picked up on the parallels of history repeating itself, right? When you're so old and you've been around for so long, history does tend to repeat itself, and you do find yourself in situations that you've probably been in before, right? Especially if you're as hard-headed as All For One and you keep doing things the same way. So I think it's very much just one of those things of like, I will not let history repeat itself, right? And have this guy who reminds me of the second user scare me or do anything or gain any ground right now. This guy ended up going on to become a One For All user and giving me trouble, so I'm gonna get rid of him. And also, I think that if the All Might vestige is in Bakugo right now, because Bakugo had One For All thanks to Heroes Rising, then it's possible that the other vestiges could maybe even make an appearance, right? Inside of Bakugo, right? Inside the embers of One For All. That maybe he has a very, very small portion of their energy left. I don't think Bakugo ever used his embers of One For All, right? We know that that's a thing. After you give One For All away, you have a certain amount of power that dwindles over time within you still, right? And Bakugo never expended that energy because while he was fighting 9, he still had One For All technically, right? And I know the movie tells us that the transfer didn't complete, but I never believe anything All Might says about One For All, because the series has literally showed us that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just running around out there. He's fooling y'all. Zero G on Twitter wants to know, how big of an impact do you actually think the second user will make in this final arc? I think his quirk is the final thing they're gonna do on Shigaraki, right? I think his quirk is some sort of beam or projectile, and now it's gotten so powerful after being the first quirk in One For All, pretty much, being in there so long, that for Deku to use it, he is going to lose an arm. I think whichever arm Deku uses the second quirk from, it's going to be bad, right? Because we know, one, that Deku's arms are barely held together, right? It's held together by paper-thin plastic and straws, right? And some gauntlets that he has on. But if something happens from within, if a beam comes from within Deku's arm, an 100% one-for-all beam, I definitely think Deku is going to lose an arm. So I think that is part of the role that the second user is going to play in causing Deku to lose that arm. But I also think that it might be necessary, right? Because we've seen Shigaraki pretty much avoid energy attacks damaging him, right? He survived the Kamehameha wave pretty much by Tamaki. He survived the energy blast and the nukes coming from Star and Stripes in America. And for Deku to have some sort of beam that powered by One For All actually damages Shigaraki and actually pierces his body and actually wipes away parts of him, I think that'd be a really, really big feat, because Star and Stripes wasn't really able to do that. So then you have Deku doing that. That's pretty awesome. That's the kind of thing that I would do for my main character, right? So also, Deku doesn't really have any piercing attack. He has Black Whip, Smoke, Float. None of these quirks are really made for actually piercing and like legitimately hurting someone more than just punching them and doing blunt force trauma, right? So I definitely think a piercing sort of laser beam or projectile or something like that, something that can actually do internal damage and pierce through Shigaraki and burn and cauterize him in the same way that we saw Endeavor had to against the High Nomu, or that he almost successfully did against Shigaraki. I think that is extremely likely for Deku to have in his kit, right? Every other thing that Deku has in his kit is more of like a tool, right? That he could use even if he was quirkless, right? A smoke screen or like a jetpack or something like that. We've seen that, or rope for Black Whip. I think this one is going to be a more flat out kind of Mega Man, Ultraman kind of laser beam to take down Shigaraki, or at least get him weak enough to get to the stage where you're almost taking him down. @WanLovePH on Twitter wants to know, if you could insert any arcs right before the final arc of My Hero, what would they be and what characters would be involved? I have two answers here, right? One, I really would like for the Shoji discrimination arc to be its own thing and have happened before this final arc, because part of the struggles of the final arc that we have is that the quirk singularity still has to be dealt with, right? It seems like one of the only answers to deal with that realistically before the end of the series is for Deku to get All For One and One For All at the same time and effectively take everyone's quirks away. You know what I mean? And make everyone quirkless and actually have all the quirks in the series and then die with them, so no one has to worry about the quirk singularity in the future. Now, whether or not that would keep future quirk users from being born, I don't know, but it might just be like a stopgap measure, right? Like we're starting over. But I think the struggle in that is there are heteromorphic quirk users, right, who've been bullied their entire life or treated differently. And, for some of them, I'm sure it's going to be a relief if they lose that quirk and they end up looking like, different, right? Or maybe they'll just look exactly the same. I don't really know how that would work. If you have a heteromorphic quirk like Tokoyami and then Deku takes away your quirk, are you going to stop being a bird person, or is your quirk only the dark shadow aspect, right? Like, I would assume that somewhere down the line, someone in Tokoyami's family has a quirk that made them a bird, right? Essentially. And that's kind of baked itself into their genes, right? So now they're just all birds. But what happens if you take away Tokoyami's quirk completely, right? Does he just lose dark shadow, or does he become like a regular human boy? Like what would he look like in that case, right? So that's kind of the question that I have for the heteromorphic quirk users. What happens to them? What happens pretty much to the ones that want to have their bodies the way that they are and are proud and have kind of overcome all these struggles of society and are like, they have they're comfortable in who they are now, you know what I mean? And then to take that away from them, that's kind of a big struggle to have to face. And that's kind of a very touchy situation. So I definitely think seeing that in more detail would really, really make the end of the series have a little more depth. But that kind of is assuming that we're going to see Deku take all the quirks, and who knows if that's going to happen anyway. Ethan Kane on Twitter, shout out to Ethan. What do you like about Re-Destro? I feel like Re-Destro originally could have been much bigger than he actually ended up being as far as his role in the story. I definitely assumed that Re-Destro was going to come in and kind of be like the Joker of MHA, right? Me and a lot of my friends thought that. Like, there was going to be this extra force in the story that was going to change everything and kind of add another league of villains, right? And they've really been like in the background showing you how villains are really supposed to be able to do it, and they'd kind of be more of a thorn in Deku and everyone's side, right? I was hoping Deku was going to internship at Detnerot, kind of like Peter Parker working at Oscorp. I was thinking like long term, right? Like maybe he'd figure out about the Meta Liberation Army and try to stop them from within or something like that. I think that could have been a really, really awesome arc, but we ended up having Re-Destro pretty much get taken down by Shigaraki, and like Shigaraki does with almost every villain he interacts with throughout the story, even All For One himself, he takes all the best aspects of who Re-Destro is, right? And maybe even some of their flaws, and adds them to himself to become a more perfect villain. So anything that I like about Shigaraki after My Villain Academia that he got from Re-Destro is something that I originally liked about Re-Destro before he was pretty much neutered at the end of that arc. Benny on Twitter wants to know, could Nana Shimura be Inko's mother? Given that they look so much alike and possibly have similar quirks, float and attracting objects / making objects float towards her, do you think that those two could be related? I absolutely do, and I've been saying this for a long time. I think Inko is going to be Nana's niece or some sort of relative, and I think the only reason that Inko is plus size in the series, beyond her guilt for not telling Deku that he could be a hero and stuff like that, I do think that is canon. Beyond that, I think the reason narratively, which is the way that I like to look at a lot of things, Horikoshi knew at some point he was going to have a conflict between All Might and Inko, right? And he was going to have to introduce All Might to Inko. But if you have Inko as skinny as she was at the very beginning of the series, I think the comparison between her and Nana becomes way too obvious, right? Like, Nana was introduced way after we had skinny Inko, like, in the story at all, right? So it's not really easy for you to draw a comparison between them there. But pretty much I think that All Might couldn't exactly tell that there was a direct relation outside of Inko having a similar hairstyle and just looking similar to her, because Inko was plus size, right? So I think that he just, because of Horikoshi doing that purposefully, All Might couldn't tell that there was a relation there, right? But I definitely do think it's possible that there is, because All Might kind of hinted towards that, right? And that was not All Might saying that. That was Horikoshi saying that, right? Saying that Inko looks kind of like my master for All Might. That was a hint to us, I believe. So whether that comes full circle, whether that goes anywhere, I think it will. I definitely think Inko being related to Nana is part of the Dad for One theory. It's kind of the reason that Dad for One or All for One would even go after Inko in the first place. So here's hoping that being true, and I do agree with you that Nana having a quirk that makes her float and Inko having a quirk that makes things around her float towards her are very, very similar quirks in and of itself. And it's definitely the kind of quirk that you could see a cousin or a niece or someone related to you having. Shadow Kage on Twitter wants to know, do you think we'll lose any big name heroes other than Hawks, Endeavor, and All Might? I definitely think we're losing Hawks. Definitely think we're losing Endeavor. Definitely think I'm 50-50 on All Might going, right? But I think a large part of this arc is going to be getting rid of a lot of the top 10 heroes, or at least making them retire, right? Putting them in situations where they have to retire to make room for the next generation of top 10 heroes, right? That vision that Endeavor had, right? Of 10 UA students with Deku, Bakugo, Kirishima, and everyone. I think that to a certain extent is going to come true, and we are going to see actually those students becoming the top 10. But it's all about how it happens, right? So I do think we are going to lose a lot of heroes in this war arc, especially after the last war arc and we only lost Midnight and a bunch of nobodies, right? You know what I mean? Oh, I don't want to say nobodies because I think Majestic also passed at that time. I think Horikoshi saw the jokes and went, okay, bet. Watch next time when I do this. Who's going to be on that page of all the losses that we had, right? Watch what I'm going to do next time. At Derek Rose 11 on Twitter wants to know, what do you think is happening to Dabi? I think Dabi is pretty much going to become a living flame, right? And Vigilante, as we saw in number 6, become pretty much living energy with his quirk awakening as far as it possibly could. I think we're very much going to see the same thing with Dabi, and it's going to put Shoto in a situation where it's like, sure, you can put out any flame now. Now put me out. Come on, little brother, put me out now. If you use that quirk on me again, I'm gone. How are you going to save me now? While just being all sorts of menace, honestly. Like, I know a lot of people think he has a Phoenix quirk. I also do, but I do think it could awaken into him just becoming a being of pure fire energy who can create fire, manipulate fire. That would kind of be the last stage of what I think Dabi's quirk would be, right? It seems like his quirk wants to break free of his body in a lot of ways, right? And allowing it to actually do that, if that still worked for him and kept him alive and he was still able to do stuff as pretty much a being of fire, I think that'd be really awesome. And I have a whole video on it if you want to check it out. Crocs Weekly on Twitter wants to know, what do you think about the temperature rising? Is it a result of Bakugo's quirk, Endeavor, or is this Dabi's doing? I don't think it has anything to do with Bakugo because it's in different areas than where Bakugo and all that stuff is happening right now. I also don't think it's related to Endeavor, honestly. I think it might honestly be what we just said with Dabi, right? Like Dabi kind of reestablishing himself as being back in the fight. Or if anything, it might be All for One potentially having Nine's quirk from Heroes Rising, right? Because in the same chapter that we see Bakugo having vestiges or something of One for All, which happened in that movie, we also are hearing about strange weather phenomena and temperatures and stuff rising around the world. And if All for One was really going to try to like control the water and all the natural resources that there are on Earth as part of his like big plan, I definitely think having Nine's quirk where you can create rain and lightning and various things would actually be very, very helpful. And then you consider like how dangerous Nine was in and of himself, right? And how the doctor actually didn't want to give Nine All for One, but he still did it anyway. I think that was so that he would have a chance to take Nine's quirk and make a copy of it and then give Nine a copy without him actually being aware of it, so he could then give the original to All For One or Shigaraki, right? I'm pretty sure he would have given it to All For One, or at least stored it in some sort of place for All For One to retrieve, right? Because we know at the very least, All For One somehow has Aries' quirk. Maybe he got it from a quirk erasing bullet, maybe he got it somehow, but there's been no point where All For One's been able to make contact with the doctor, right, to get that quirk. He was in prison during the entire area arc and ever since then, right? So I don't know how it makes sense that he has that quirk, and I definitely think that's a mystery that we're gonna find out about soon, that he maybe updated his loadout of quirks using something that Uchako left him behind somewhere, or something specific, right? Some sort of preparation for if this ever happened and All For One was ever free, but Uchako wasn't available to go to him. At Tolerant MP3 on Twitter is asking, do you think All For One is actually going to transform back into his prime version of himself and fight alongside Shigaraki against Deku, or have a one-on-one versus Deku? I do think more or less All For One is reverting himself back to his prime version, but that's a little complicated, right? Because he's reverting himself back to like his prime age and his prime kind of body, right? But that doesn't mean he's technically as strong as the All For One that took on All Might, right? Because we know that the loadout of All For One, or the version of All For One of all those dangerous quirks that took down All Might, is currently inside of Shigaraki. And we know that All For One's loadout is completely different quirks to when he fought All Might originally, thanks to Gran Torino's statements during the Camino arc. As strong as All For One's gonna be, I don't think he's going to be as strong as he was before with all the centuries and whatever of quirks that he had inside of the quirk that's right now inside of Shigaraki, but quirks have gotten a lot more complicated and a lot more powerful as time has gone on, and he did go to Tartarus and various prisons, and I definitely think a part of that process wasn't only breaking free prisoners. I do think he took quirks from various prisoners, kind of just to fit what he would like to have in this final battle. But no, I don't see All For One fighting alongside Shigaraki against Deku. I see the opposite, actually. I see Tenko and Deku fighting alongside each other against All For One, right? And then Tenko actually being the one to finally take All For One out. At Tyler Tiller 22 on Twitter wants to know, how do you think Deku will react to the death of his late friend? Oh, I think we all know how Deku's gonna react. I think it's gonna be very, very not good for Shigaraki All For One. And he's gonna have a very, very long afternoon, right? We're about to see some unfiltered, insane maniac Deku in a way that we have never ever seen before in this series, right? So hang in there. I'm also saying that to Shigaraki because it's about to get bad. We're about to see Deku insane, I think, honestly, for a little bit. But at the end of it, we're still gonna have to have the quirk tug of war. As soon as Shigaraki tries to take one for all from Deku, we're gonna go back to kind of like calm, even-headed Deku within the vestige space, so that can only last for so long. Thy Anomaly on Twitter wants to know, would you want aliens to appear? And if so, if they had their own powers not related to quirks, what would that be? I don't want this to become Naruto, where it becomes obvious that near the end, the author is not planning for there to be another part. They have one intention for how the story is going to go, and then seemingly editors or something, someone steps in and says, hey dude, create aliens, do Kaguya and all this stuff. This is how we're going to set up the next part, right? Kaguya and all that stuff seems not entirely out of nowhere. It is set up to a certain extent, right? But like sometimes things that are set up are not set up for the things that end up becoming what they're set up for, right? Sometimes you could just have something that you're like, oh, I could do more of this. I can create something now to turn that into setup, right? And I definitely think Kaguya and aliens and all that kind of stuff definitely is that sort of thing, right? So do I personally want aliens to appear? No, but if they did have their own powers, I would want them to actually be drastically different from quirks, right? In a certain way, maybe magic or something, right? Like I just want some sort of very different ability. Maybe I have to pick Don or whatever it is back up to really see like what powers the aliens in there are using for some sort of inspiration. Quantified on Twitter wants to know, would you want a sequel to My Hero Academia? If so, what would it be about? Assuming All For One / Shigaraki get defeated this arc, who would the antagonist be? The protagonist? Would we follow Deku? Would we go to another country? Or would it continue the current conflicts in the story? I think I could go two ways with this, right? I don't want a sequel to My Hero Academia if it's going to be like some Boruto stuff, and if it's not going to be literally Horikoshi doing it. And honestly, I've kind of gotten to the point where I really want Horikoshi to do that horror manga that he's been saying he's gonna do for a little bit now. So honestly, I don't think it's likely that we get another part to My Hero Academia, just a lot of one-shots and stuff like that. But if we did, yeah, I guess starting over and just going to a whole different location and dealing with a whole nother thing, and then maybe having Deku and those heroes get involved somehow would be kind of the best way to do it, right? Because I don't know, I do want to see grown up Deku and everyone kind of doing their thing and really focusing on them going on patrols and stuff. But I just feel like we're not going to see that, right? So if we're not going to see that, we should at least see like some other struggle in some other country that relates to the themes of the original My Hero Academia, right? If someone is going to do it, at least let it be the Team Up Missions author, because they are great art, great writing and everything. It still feels like My Hero Academia to a certain extent. If you were ever going to continue My Hero Academia beyond My Hero Academia, I would have it be by the Team Up Missions author, with Horikoshi having some sort of supervision, very much in the same way that Toriyama and Toyotaro have been working for the last couple years. At Jaokaka on Twitter wants to know, you think that Spinner will have any kind of raw moment? Want to see my Lizard King be respected. I think Spinner is very much going to kind of be like the new Makia in a certain way in this arc, as long as Makia doesn't break out, right? Because I definitely think that All For One has turned Spinner into his next tool, pretty much to use, and taken away Spinner's actual humanity that he's had over the course of the series, right? So I think that'll be really interesting to see if Spinner actually does retain any of that personality or humanity that he did have. I thought for a long time that Spinner would actually betray All For One in favor of Shigaraki, right? Maybe seeing that kind of thing. Who knows now, because everyone's in different areas, and I don't know if we're going to see everyone link back up again. I would really like for everyone to link back up again and everyone to be in the same place more or less, but who knows if that's going to happen, right? We know that Monoma can't use his quirk to pretty much go back to the Warp Gate quirk and bring everyone back, because then Shigaraki is going to be able to just use whatever quirks that he has against whoever is there, right? But I know at a certain point, we probably are going to want Shigaraki to be able to use his quirks again, because we're going to need that for him to try to steal One For All from Deku, and for them to have the whole quirk tug of war, and for Deku to save Tenko. So eventually, that erasure on Shigaraki is going to have to be dropped, and I think that's going to put everyone in some really big danger, but that's what they have to do to actually get the win. Alter B Drawing on Twitter wants to know, you think Horikoshi got a hand fetish? Asking for a friend. Yes. And finally, Alex27D on Twitter wants to know, if you could replace Deku's quirks, which ones would you switch out and switch them with? I remember there was like a leaked list of quirks for Deku, right? A long time ago. It was like a 4chan list or something like that. And some of those quirks were actually pretty great. There was like a green thumb quirk where Deku could like create plant life, pretty much turning him into like a lesser green bull from One Piece, right? He could make life, and it would kind of make sense of his like his name and his green hair and everything like that. Him being able to create plants and like do that with One For All, and like the amazing things that he would have been able to do with that, with like vines and trees and just whatever he could think of, right? And learning more about plants and herbology. I think that would have been really awesome, right? Beyond that, I think a quirk that kind of changes his density would have also been really awesome. And I think that's another one that was in the list of fake quirks, because, you know, make Deku making his hand weigh 1,000 times more, or 1,000 times more dense, would really strengthen all the impacts of his attacks, right? And that's one of the things that would have been very dangerous if One For All and New Order kind of came in contact, right? If Star and Stripes gave Deku New Order, because she definitely could have done that. She could have said, I give my quirk to Izuku Midoriya. Or New Order belongs to Izuku Midoriya. She could have done that, and then Deku would have been able to do stuff like Izuku Midoriya is 100 times denser or something like that, right? Like, and that would have just been nutty. So I feel like those are the kind of quirks that I would switch Deku's quirks with, but I like a lot of Deku's quirks, to be honest, because I kind of feel like it makes the quirkless Deku people happy, because they're all tools that a quirkless person could have used, and it makes the people who don't want Deku to have massively overpowered quirks very happy, right? They're all boosted through One For All, so it makes them all significantly more powerful, but none of them are like unbelievably broken, you know what I mean? Outside of maybe Fajin, right? Like, none of them are really outstanding as far as what we've seen so far. So that's my personal opinion, and that seems to be the final question. So thank you guys so much for this Q&A. It was fun answering questions on Twitter, and if you guys want any questions that you want answered, drop them in the comment section below, and we'll do another one of these videos with subscriber questions. That was a lot. I've been sitting here recording for what? At least almost an hour. So let's try to cut this down to as short as we can and not do too much, but I gotta go do that right now. So I'll see you guys later. It's Pineapple. Peace.